Okay, thank you all so much for joining us in our Zoom Shiur today. For some reason, I'm still getting a little bit of an echo. Let's see what I could do over here. Okay. Thank you all so much for joining us for the Shiur. I hope everyone had a beautiful Shabbat, considering the circumstances. And I wish everyone a Shavua Tov. And nice to see you and to learn together with you. I see some of you by video, some of you by audio, and let's learn. Now, usually this is a Parsha Shiur, but then we also have contemporary topics for the second session. We're just going to have one session today from 11 to 12. And I thought that we should talk about, being that Pesach is 9 days away, whether we like it or not, here we come. So let's talk about Pesach themes, specifically about the Haggadah. So the evening of Pesach, we call the Pesach Seder. And so one expression that I think about with regards to the Pesach Seder is Hakol B'Seder. And this has two meanings. It has one meaning generally for me, which is that Hakol B'Seder, that all Jewish values, all ideas, all ideals can be found in the Pesach Seder and in all the components of the evening. The second message of Hakol B'Seder is that, especially this year, at a time of uncertainty, right, that really we believe, we have emunah that things will be okay, that things are okay despite the uncertainty, despite the crisis that we're going through. And so number one, Hakol B'Seder, everything, all values are found in the Seder. But also I think the goal of the evening is to realize that there's a Seder, right? That there's a Seder in our lives, that there's a Seder in the world. And even with the uncertainty and anxiety, there's a God who runs the world. There's a meaning and purpose to why things happen, even if we don't always understand that purpose. Okay. There's a total of 15 parts of the Seder, and that's if you count motzi, matzah as two different parts. My son, for some reason, asked me a couple of days ago, is motzi matzah counted as one part, or is it counted as two parts? So motzi matzah could be counted as two parts, right? We make hamotzi lechem and aretz to begin the meal. But also, matzah, right? We have a special mitzvah of eating the matzah at the Seder night. So if we count motzi matzah as two different items, so we have a total of 15 parts of the Pesach Seder. We also, when we think about the song of Dayenu at the Seder, so there are 15 different stages for which we express gratitude to Hashem. The number 15 comes up at another time, which is what day on the Jewish calendar is Pesach taking place? It's taking place, of course, on the 15th of Nisan. So the number 15 is ubiquitous to some degree at the Pesach night. It's not as common as the number 4, but the number 15 comes up in those few different places. And I once heard from Rabbi Benjamin Blech, and I think he writes about this in his Haggadah, that 15, the fact that it's taking place on the 15th of Nisan, and there are 15 different parts of the Seder, and there's 15 phases and stages of the song of Dayenu that we sing. So 15 is Yud Hey, which is the name of Hashem. And that central to the evening of Pesach is recognizing God's presence in our lives. We have to build over the course of the evening faith. And faith in Hashem, who not only created the world, but he took us out of Mitzrayim, and he's an active presence in our lives in the world. However, it's interesting that Yud Hey is the incomplete name of Hashem. The complete name of Hashem is Yud K Vav K. Why do I say K instead of Hey? Because you're not supposed to say that name. Even when we're saying a bracha, we don't say the name the way it's written. We say Aleph Daled Nun Yud Ado, right? And so we're not supposed to say the name. We're not supposed to say it as Aleph Daled Nun Yud. And we also are not even supposed to say those letters in sequence. So sometimes when people say the letters of the name, they'll say Yud K Vav K. Okay. So the complete name of Hashem is the 4-letter name of Yud K Vav K. Yud and Hey, and then a Vav and a Hey. So why do we have only 15 parts of the Seder, which are parallel to the Yud Hey, which is the incomplete name of Hashem? And the answer is that Rabbi Blech suggested is that as long as we live in an imperfect world, and as long as the forces of evil Amalek, which represents the evil of the world, is still present, so then God's name is incomplete. The pasuk says in a war against Amalek, it says, Ki yod al keiska, that the hand of Amalek is on the throne of Hashem. And the throne is usually spelled Chaf Samach Aleph. Chaf Samach Aleph means the chair or the throne of Hashem. But the word is spelled Chaf Samach, which is incomplete. And the full name of Hashem is Yud Kei Vav Kei, but Hashem's name there in the context of Amalek, at the end of Parshat Bashalach, is Yud Kei. So what we see from here is that as long as Amalek is in the world, as long as you have those forces of evil that are fighting against Israel, as long as you have those forces that are denying the presence of God in the world, that are doing evil to other people, are enemies of the Jewish people, and want to harm the state of Israel or Jews, as long as you have that, so then God's name is incomplete. And so at the Pesach Seder, we're expressing tremendous gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the past redemptions. We're thanking Hashem for Yetzias Mitzrayim, but we're recognizing that we're hopeful still for the future redemption. And we recognize that we're not yet at the Yemot HaMashiach. So that's really something to keep in mind on Pesach night, which is that we're thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for all of our blessings, and we spend time thinking about the gifts that we have in our lives, but we also have a right to think about and pray for the crisis to be over, for us to have more blessings in our lives, and for future redemption of the people of Israel. And so the night is a night of gratitude, but also prayer. We're grateful and appreciative of the past redemption from Mitzrayim and all the redemptions over the course of history, but for hopeful and praying for the future redemption. So Yud Kei is a theme of the night, but it's incomplete. But we have the ability as Jews to celebrate a redemption even if it's incomplete. And so we celebrate on Pesach night, but we're hopeful for the future. The Hallel, how do I prove this from the structure of the Pesach Seder? Because the Hallel at the Seder is broken into two. The first two paragraphs of Hallel are prior to the meal, and the second half of the Hallel is after the meal. Why is it broken into two parts? And so the commentaries explain, because the first half of the Hallel focuses on the Exodus from Egypt. The second paragraph of the Hallel is B'tzeis Yisrael mi Mitzrayim Beis Yaakov Me'am Lo'ez. And if you look at the first two chapters of Hallel, you're welcome, and thank you. Hold the applause. If you want to applaud my singing, you could. There's a reaction there where you could applaud, but you don't need to applaud. That's okay. We'll hold up cue cards as to what type of responses that you need to have. But if you check the first two chapters of the Hallel, you'll notice that there's a focus on Yetziat Mitzrayim. And so the first two chapters are before the meal, because the focus of the Magid and the focus of the first half of the Seder is appreciating Hashem for his salvation in the past, right? And it's over the course of history. It's Yetzias Mitzrayim over the course of history. And that's the focus of the Magid, right? Relating the Pesach story and reenacting it for today. But it's appreciating Hashem for the past, and of course, reenacting it in our lives. So that's the first two chapters of the Hallel. The remainder of the Hallel is left for after the meal, because that's when we turn towards the future. That's when we hope that the incomplete name of Hashem will ultimately become complete. The name of Yud Kei will become Yud Kei Vav Kei, and the last paragraphs of the Hallel, explain the commentaries, are a turn towards the future where we're hopeful and we're praying for a better time forward for all of us. Now, we see this also in the Yehei Shmei Rabbah, this concept of praying for the completeness, for the completion of the name of Hashem. So Yehei Shmei Rabbah, right? One of the most powerful lines in Jewish liturgy is the Yehei Shmei Rabbah. And the rabbis view that line of Yehei Shmei Rabbah as having almost like cosmic significance, that a person who says Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevarach to Kaddish can reverse a decree of 70 years for bad and can reverse it for good. That's something that I feel I really, really miss, is hearing the Kaddish and answering Yehei Shmei Rabbah to the Kaddish. We are able to daven these weeks. We are able to see one another and learn together. But one thing that I'm missing is the Kaddish and that powerful line of Yehi Shmei Rabbah. And that line of Yehi Shmei Rabbah, so what does that even mean? So according to Tosfot and the mainstream interpretation, it means, may the great name of God, Yehi Shmei Rabbah, Mivarach Le'olam Yamayah, it should be blessed forever and ever. However, Rashi, as quoted in Tosfot, in Brachot, I think it's Gimel Amud Aleph, so Tosfos, Gimel Amud Aleph, quotes the Machzor Vitri, which is the traditions from the students of Rashi, and the customs and thinking of Rashi. So Rashi understood that line to mean as follows: Yehi Shmei Rabbah, that Yehi Shem Ka, that the incomplete name of Hashem should become complete. We're hoping and praying for the elimination of the enemies of Israel, including the Iranian regime and Hamas and Hezbollah that want to destroy Israel, right? Where Yehi Shem Ka, that as long as those forces of Amalek are in the world, the name of Hashem is incomplete. So the first part of Yehi Shmei Rabbah is saying, Yehi Shem Ka, the incomplete name of Hashem, Rabbah, should become complete. And then we say, Mevarach Le'olam Yamayah, God's name, hopefully complete name, should be blessed forever and ever. Okay, so that's an idea that you could share any point at the Seder, because it relates to the 15 parts of the Seder, 15 stages of the Yenu, 15th night of the Seder. It's all about bringing Hashem into our lives. The project of the Seder is accepting upon ourselves and recognizing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world. However, right, but in our lives and redemption, it's the name of Hashem is incomplete, and we're trying to go from the Yud K to the complete name of Hashem, right? That's what the first half of the Seder is, a focus on the past, and then we're hopeful and praying for the future. Okay, so I see here that I think a question came in. So let's see what question came in. This is from Sam and Rabbi to everyone. We also see the same message at the end of Aleinu. What's the message at the end of Aleinu, Sam? In terms of that we hope that everyone accepts the Malchus of Hashem.
Yeah, at the end it says, "Vaya Hashem lamelech bayom hahu yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad." So u'shmo echad, the whole name, or complete name.
Oh, very, very nice. Okay, very, very nice idea that it should be the name of Hashem should be echad, and it should be the complete name of Hashem ultimately at the end of days and the Mirz Hashem in our lives. Okay, thanks, Sam, for that point. Now, let's talk for a moment about the structure of the Haggadah. One very important principle to understand is that at the Seder night, we're matchil begnut u'mesayim b'shevach. That the journey that we take at the Seder is that we go from bad and we go to good. We go from a time of degradation to the time of praise and liberation. But there's a debate between Rav and Shmuel. If you want to understand the structure of the Haggadah, so you have to understand that there's a debate between Rav and Shmuel exactly how to accomplish this journey from bad to good. According to Rav says that you go from the time that Avram was an idolater all the way to the time that the Jewish people accepted Hashem at Har Sinai. And that's the long trajectory of going from the negative to the positive. Shmuel disagrees and says that no, that you have to go from Avadim Hayinu to the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has V'yotzeinu Hashem Elokeinu Misham, that Hashem has taken us out of Mitzrayim. You go from the fact that we were slaves in Egypt to the fact that we were redeemed and liberated from Mitzrayim. So it seems to be clear that there's a debate here between Rav and Shmuel. Do you focus on what's really going on here between Rav and Shmuel? Rav is focusing on the spiritual, psychological, spiritual and intellectual journey that we take. So he says that we have to go on Pesach night, not just in a narrow sense to Mitzrayim, but we have to think about world history and religious history. We have to go all the way back to Avraham, who was an idolater in the early years of his life, and how Avram discovered Hashem, of course, and Avram founded, right, the Jewish people in a certain sense, right? Avram is the first of our patriarchs, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. They established a covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that then developed from the Jewish family to the Jewish people to the Jewish people receiving the Torah and Har Sinai. However, Shmuel understands that we need to focus, our primary focus needs to be on the physical element, and that we went from physically being enslaved to being freed. So if you look at the Haggadah, and I have a Haggadah in front of me, the Haggadah, the Magid, really follows this structure. First, we have the Manishtana questions, the 4 Manishtana questions. That's followed by the answer. The answer to the Manishtana questions is Havada Mayina, we were slaves and then we were freed. That is in accordance with Shmuel's position, that you go from the physical slavery to the physical liberation. And then we also follow Rav's opinion later on. We have the 4 questions again, but the 4 questions are now from the 4 different children, from the Chacham, the Rasha, the Tam, Shena, the Elishol. We have all different types of people, and right, we have all different people around the Seder table. And so we have the 4 questions from the 4 children, and then after the 4 children, we say, Mitchila Ovdei Avodah Zarah Haya Avotenu, that our forefathers were idolaters, and the Achshav Kervano Hamakam Lavadaso, and now Hashem has brought us close to his service. And hi Neil, how you doing? It's great to see you. I'm in the middle of a shiur. We'll be in touch. Great to see you, Neil. Thank you so much. Be in touch. So to understand what's going on here in the Seder is that you really have a structure in the Magid of you go from bad to good, from the degradation to praise. And there's 2 different positions between Rav and Shmuel how to achieve that. And which one do we follow? We follow both. We follow Shmuel and Rav. First, we achieve Shmuel with the Manishtana questions leading into Avadam Hayinu. And then we achieve Rav by doing the 4 questions from the 4 children leading into Rav, which is that we say that we were idolaters, and now we have come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what that gets us thinking about is that freedom is not just a physical experience, but it's also a spiritual, psychological, religious experience. Rav Kook famously said that a person could be enslaved physically, but yet be free spiritually. And a person, and you see many people today, could be freed physically, but yet are really enslaved spiritually. They're enslaved to their desires. They're enslaved to all the different influences of the world. And you have people who are shackled to social conformity. And so there are both things that we think about at the Seder night, which is that we're looking and hoping and praying for freedom for the Jewish people, but also for ourselves. The story of Pesach night is a story of Yetzias Mitzrayim for all of us. And this Yetzias Mitzrayim is on a physical level, but also a spiritual level. And sometimes it may be easier to be physically free, certainly during our generation. I'm not referring specifically now to the crisis that we're going through, but in general, in our generation, we have all the blessings and freedoms, but maybe we have to focus even more on the spiritual freedom that we're all trying to achieve in our lives. Now, relating to this is a question, and then I'm going to get your question, which is, why is it that the 4 questions of the Manishtana are all asked by all the children? Everyone asks the questions of the Manishtana. However, with the questions of the children, now suddenly the Chacham has one question, and the Rasha has another question, and the Tam has another question. How does this fit into the framework that we just developed in terms of this Machlokes Rav and Shmuel? So I'd like to suggest the following idea for your consideration, that the first part of the Seder, as we just said, is focusing on the physical journey of redemption. Within the physical dimension, so all the Jews who were freed had the same experience. All right, we all know that many Jews did not merit the freedom, but for those Jews who experienced Yetzias Mitzrayim, they all got out of Mitzrayim, they all went through the same experience, and therefore the questions apply to everyone. There's 4 generic questions that we all ask of Manishtana, and of course the children are often customarily the ones who ask it, but these are the 4 questions that we all have, because we all went through the experience together, And we all have a certain experience of freedom, although of course in different degrees of freedom nowadays. Some people don't have, perhaps don't have the same freedoms, and we're thinking about them as well. But on a physical plane, all the Jewish people experienced the redemption together, whoever experienced it, and therefore the same questions apply to everyone. However, with regards to the spiritual journey, whether in Yetzias Mitzrayim or in all generations and today, am I right that every single person has a different experience? Every single person, based on his or her background, based on his or her personality and way of thinking, has a different question. And so in this dimension, that's why you have the Chacham who asks one question, you have the Rasha who asks a different question, you have the simple child that has another question, and the Shena De'al Lishon. So that's my suggestion as to how we map out the structure of the Haggadah, which is, and that's also because people just read through the Haggadah, they don't even know what they're doing sometimes. And of course, we try to give, insights on every paragraph of the Haggadah, but that's the general framework of going from degradation to praise. We achieve both on a physical dimension following Shmuel, and then on a spiritual dimension following Rav. And that's why we have the 4 generic questions first, and the 4 unique questions for every single person, because in the physical dimension, every single person is going through the same experience, and we're affected in a similar fashion, so we all have the same Manishtana questions. But in regards to the spiritual and intellectual dimension, each person, due to his or her unique personality and experiences, comes to the table with a different question and a different idea, and brings a different perspective to the experience. And that's why we have the 4 questions, and each one needs a different response. Whether you're a teacher or an educator or a parent or a grandparent or a friend, each question coming from that particular person needs a different response. Okay, any questions on that? I think, Sam, yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Rabbi. It's actually not a question, but just a comment. The fact that we combine Rav and Shmuel, I think that was the original purpose of Yetziat Mitzrayim, when Hashem or Moshe meets Hashem at the burning bush at the sneh. He tells them, "This will be the sign for you." I don't know the exact quote. That when you go out from Mitzrayim Tavdun, you will worship me at the mountain. And also when Moshe tells Paro, he doesn't just say Shlach et ami, that let my people go. It says Vayavduni, and the idea is to worship Hashem. So you have a combination right there, and I think that's what Rav and Shmuel are trying to portray on different levels, and that's what the Haggadah does, as you beautifully showed.
Okay, I think that's a beautiful, beautiful idea, Sam, that's a point that I didn't really emphasize, which is that, of course, that the purpose of the redemption from Egypt was to develop a relationship with Hashem and to receive the Torah on Har Sinai. And that's the reason why at the Seder night, we celebrate freedom. But then already on the second night, what do we begin to do? We begin to count Sfiras Omer, leading up to Shavuos. And what that shows is that freedom, yes, we celebrate it on the first night, but really it's always in the context of climbing that mountain and establishing that relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not just about having the freedom, but okay, what are we now going to do with the freedom? And all along, it's that Tavdun Elokim Bahar Hazeh, to serve Hashem. So that's a phenomenal and important point. Thank you, Sam. Okay. All right, we're rolling and we're gaining strength from the Haggadah, even though it's a week, 9 days before the Seder, we're already gaining strength. One of the intriguing elements of the Seder, all right, so after the Manishtana and after the answer of Avadim Hayinu, so then we have the Seder that takes place in Bnei Brak. And the Seder is about 5 sages who had the Seder in, the paragraph is about the 5 sages who have a Seder in Bnei Brak. And it says that they were relating the story of the Exodus the entire night. And they did this, they were telling over the story until their students came and said, hey, rabbis, Rabbeim, the time has come to say Kriyat Shema. And the question is, what's so important about the Seder? Why is this detail so significant that the rabbis were speaking about Yetzias Mitzrayim until until the students came and told them about the Zman Kriya Shema, the time of saying the Shema. And I once learned this, and perhaps it's my idea, perhaps I learned this, I don't remember from where, but that how do we understand the Seder? That the Seder night is all about the transmission of our values. It's the responsibility of every single Jew to learn Torah and to understand Jewish values. Secondly, the values that you learn, you have to then apply to your lives, right? You have to observe the mitzvot and you have to live according to those values and ideals. But it's not just about learning and about living, but we're also have a responsibility to transmit the values of the Masorah, of the mitzvos, of Jewish values to the next generation. And that's a lot about what the Seder is all about, transmitting the Masorah to the next generation. And so these rabbis, during that time, are the main figures of the days of the Mishnah. And so these rabbis represent the sages of the tradition that have that responsibility of teaching Torah to the future generations. That time that they were having the Seder was a time of the Roman persecution. They were in hiding. It's fair to suggest that they were in hiding at that time. It's very possible that they were plotting, and the reason why they were together was they were plotting the Bar Kokhba rebellion. We don't know exactly if that was the case, but we certainly know that it was a time of persecution and great difficulty for the Jewish people. The Masorah was at stake. The question was whether the Jewish people are going to be able to transmit the Masorah, the Jewish tradition, to the future generations. There was great uncertainty at that time. And so perhaps what's going on over here is at the time of uncertainty, the sages were speaking about Yetzias Mitzrayim the entire night until the students absorbed the message. Number one, even at this time of darkness for the Jewish people and uncertainty, they gathered together at the home of Rabbi Akiva because it was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the rabbi who lived in Bnei Brak, and Rabbi Akiva was the rabbi who was the rabbi of hope and optimism. Rabbi Akiva is the rabbi when it was the fox were coming out of the Holy and Holies, and all the other rabbis cried. It was Rabbi Akiva who laughed. And they said, well, Rabbi Akiva, why are you laughing? And he said, why are you crying? They said, we're crying because there are foxes that are going through the Beis Hamikdash, which was the place of the service of the Kohen Gadol, and now foxes and animals are running through it. How can we not cry? And why are you laughing? And Rabbi Akiva said, well, because if this prophecy was fulfilled, that the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed, which was the prophecies of Yirmiyahu, so then the prophecies of Zechariah and others will also ultimately be fulfilled. That Od Yeshvu Zakenim Zakenat Berachovas Yerushalayim, that there's going to come a time where the Jewish people are going to come back to the land of Israel, and that old and young are going to play again in the parks, on the streets, in the playgrounds of Yerushalayim and in Eretz Yisrael. And we're witnessing this return of the Jewish people to Israel today. We're witnessing, and we're living in a time when the prophecies are being fulfilled after so many generations. And that's the great privilege we have to live in these times of miracle. But it was Rabbi Akiva and other rabbis like him. It was Rabbi Akiva who was the rabbi of hope and optimism. So it was this time of Roman persecution, of great difficulty for the Jewish people. The Beis Hamikdash had just been destroyed, and the question is, what's going to be and how are we going to be able to continue? So that's why the rabbis got together to be inspired by the hope and optimism of Rabbi Akiva. And they told the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim to draw strength from that story, that just like Hashem saved the Jewish people then, he's going to save us now. And they related the story and they conveyed the values until the students, until the next generation absorbed the message. And so the success of the evening was measured by their capacity of the students. In other words, the success of the evening was measured by the capacity of the students to learn about Shema and to recognize their responsibility. And so that's what the Haggadah means when it says that they were telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim the entire night representing a time of darkness, of persecution. And it was certainly a time that was such a difficult time for the Jewish people then, in which those rabbis were living. And the success of the evening was measured by the capacity of the students to then understand that they have to say the Shema. So they told the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim until the students came and said, rabbis, we get it. We understand what you're telling us. We have a responsibility to say the Shema. Let us all together be makabel aleinu al malchus shemayim. The project of the evening again, the project of the Seder evening again, is to recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world and we have a relationship with Hashem. And that's signified by the quintessential mitzvah of the Kriyat Shema. And so the students come to the rabbis and say, we get it, and we are going to say Shema, and let us say Shema together. And so these rabbis were successful in transmitting the Torah to the next generation, and now it's our responsibility. We, all of you, as educated Jews, as advanced Jews, as Jews who care about the Jewish people, and who care about the state of Israel and Jewish values, it's now our responsibility on Pesach, but before Pesach and after Pesach, to make sure to live in a way, by word and example, to transmit that Masorah to the next generation, so that the next generation will also want to say Kriya Shema and inspire and transmit that Masorah, take the baton and transmit it to future generations as well. One thing that we do that's interesting at the Seder is we do dippings. And this is something I like to highlight when I teach about the Seder. Now, you might say that the dippings is not such an important part of the Seder, but dippings are highlighted in the Manishtana, right? What do we say in the Manishtana? We have 4 questions. And we say, Shebechol halelot, ein anu matbilim afilu pam achat. On all other nights, we don't dip our food even once. In other words, we don't go out of our way to dip. Sometimes we dip, sometimes we don't dip. But halayla hazeh, on this night, shtei pa'amim. On this night, we dip twice. We double dip, but we do it in a staggered fashion. When do we dip twice? So, firstly, we dip the vegetable into salt water, and we call that karpas. And the second time we dip the maror into the charoset. So those are the 2 official dippings that we have over the course of the night. And again, we make reference to these 2 dippings in the Manishtana when we say all of the nights we dip, we don't dip, but halayla hazeh, shtei piyamim. Now, why do we dip twice, and what's the significance of these dippings? So the answer to this I heard from a combination from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs and also from my Rabbi, Rabbi Jacob J. Schachter, and combining those ideas and things that I've read in addition, that essentially karpas, what is the meaning of karpas? Okay, karpas means wool. How do I know this? Because Rashi tells us this in Parshat Vayeshev, where it says that Yaakov gave Yosef a ketonet pasim. So Rashi says that pasim is a plural of pas, and that it means different wool materials, right? It was different kinds of wool that were used to make the coat for Yosef. So Rashi says that pasim means wool, and Rashi quotes as a proof text the pasuk in Megillat Esther, which says Chur karpas utechelet. That, and the word karpas actually comes up in the first chapter of Megillat Esther. It's referring to the tapestries and the woolen garments and tapestries that Achashverosh used in his party. And Rashi quotes that pasuk to explain the coat of Yosef, that it's a ketonet pasim, and the word pasim is related to the word karpas in Megillat Esther. So you see from here, and Rabbeinu Manoach is the one who, Rabbeinu Manoach in his commentary on the Rambam, he's the one who suggests that the karpas at the Seder symbolizes the wool coat of Yosef, which was given to him by his father Yaakov. And I just quoted to you the psukim that prove that. And what Rabbeinu Manoach says is that we dip a vegetable into salt water at the beginning of the Seder because we want to reenact the brothers' dipping of the coat of Yosef into blood. They dipped the coat of Yosef into blood to deceive their father Yaakov, to make Yaakov think that Yosef had been killed. We all know that what happened was that the brothers had sold Yosef down into slavery into Mitzrayim. And so karpas means wool. It's a reference and an allusion to Yosef's coat. And when we dip the vegetable into salt water, we're reenacting that unfortunate time of dipping when the brothers dipped the coat of Yosef into blood. We're dipping the karpas into salt water. And what we see from here is that at the very beginning of the Seder, towards the beginning of the Seder at the karpas, we say, before we start speaking about how the Jewish people got out of Egypt, and before we start speaking about future redemptions, let us think about how the Jewish people got into Egypt in the first place. And the way the Jewish people ended up landing in Egypt was because of their division, because of their fragmentation, because they couldn't get along with one another. It was because the brothers of Yosef were jealous of one another and they were fighting with one another. That's what led the brothers to sell Yosef into slavery. And so perhaps what we're doing at the beginning of the Seder is that we take a moment to reenact and reflect upon how the Jews tragically got into Mitzrayim in the first place. And the project of the Seder evening is to address this divisiveness, symbolized by the karpas. And what we do is we try to replace it. We try to respond to it with a greater emphasis on respect and unity and togetherness to try to turn things around. The first dipping is taking something sweet and dipping it into something bitter. We take the sweet vegetable, the parsley or the potato, and we dip it into salt water. Why? Because the brothers, there was tremendous potential there. And they ended up getting back together in Mitzrayim, and so the Jewish story was able to continue. But earlier on, there was tremendous potential. And it was a sweet situation where each of the brothers had a unique place in the family. However, it was made bitter because it was dipped into the salt water. That situation was made bitter through their inability to respect one another and the divisiveness that they had. And that's what led to the sale of Yosef. They dipped the coat into blood. And that's what we do. We take the vegetable, the sweet item, and we dip it into bitter because that sweet situation was made bitter. What's the second dipping at the Seder? What's the second dipping at the Seder? The second dipping is the maror into charoset. The maror represents the bitterness of the slavery. So this is now generations later. This is now generations after the sale of Yosef. The Jewish people now have been in Mitzrayim for an extended period of time with intensifying degrees of slavery and persecution. And now, how are they going to get out of Mitzrayim? So Hashem commands Moshe to command the Jewish people to take an animal on the 10th and to slaughter the lamb on the 14th. But what Moshe says to the Jewish people is, he says, take an agudat ezov, take a bundle of haisa, take a bundle of the ezov and dip it into the blood. Why does Moshe Rabbeinu tell the Jewish people to take an aguda, to take a bundle, to do the dipping? God doesn't command Moshe to do that, or at least it's not explicitly found in Chumash that God commands Moshe to do that. But Moshe is the one who tells Bnei Israel that when you do the dipping into the blood, so take an aguda. Why? Because maybe what's going on over here is that this is now the second dipping into the blood of the Pesach story. The first dipping into blood of the Pesach story was when the brothers dipped the coat into blood. That's how the story, the sad, unfortunate story, began. But now it's a later time in history, and now there's a second dipping into blood. And this is the blood that represents the faith of the Jewish people. It represents their ability to defy the order of Paro and to kill the deity of the Egyptians, which was the lamb. But now, how is their redemption going to be clinched? The Jewish people have to come together. The Jewish people have to learn the lesson of the division and fragmentation and sinat chinam of the time of Yosef. And now they finally have to join together in achdus, where we get along with one another, we respect each other, we recognize that there's so much that we have in common values, common goals, destiny, history, that's much more than what divides us. And so that's the second dipping into blood. And Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, take an aguda, take a bundle. That bundle represents achdut. It represents the need of the Jewish people to come together. And the Jewish people actually do come together there. Certainly at Har Sinai, it says, Vayichan Sham, they were ki'ish echad b'lev echad. The Jewish people are able to come together at the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And so that's where they were able to take a bitter situation and make it sweet through their coming together, through their achdut. So the second dipping is the maror into charoset. The maror represents the bitterness of the slavery. The maror is dipped into the sweet charoset. So this is in contrast to the karpas. Those are the two dippings, right? Those are the two dippings of the Seder. The first one is the sweet into bitter, because that's the division of the brothers of Yosef. That's symbolized by the karpas. Karpas means wool. We don't want to eat wool. We could have taken a piece of wool, but the rabbis decided to take a food representing the wool, the woolen coat, and to dip it into salt water, and they called it karpas. Again, that's Rabbeinu Manoach in his commentary, and the Rambam says that the karpas symbolizes the wool coat of Yosef. And so that's the first dipping. The first dipping represents how we got into Mitzrayim, and because we didn't respect one another, symbolized by the story of the coat of Yosef. But then, by the end of the Seder, now we're celebrating how we got out of Mitzrayim. And we got out of Mitzrayim because, for a number of reasons, but also because of the key component of us unifying and respecting one another finally. And it's that achdus, which is the prerequisite for redemption from Mitzrayim, but also from receiving the Torah, in Har Sinai. And so the first dipping represents the beginning, second dipping represents the end. The first dipping is take something sweet, it was made bitter through division. The second dipping is maror, representing the bitterness of the persecution that was made sweet. We dip it into charoset, it was made sweet by the Jewish people coming together. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu tells Bnei Israel, take an aguda, take a bundle, because we have to come together. We have to join together as a people and work together if we want to get out of Mitzrayim and if we want to live successful lives. And so that's the story of the Pesach Seder and why we have two dippings at the Seder. There are four cups. Oh yes, Judy. You can take yourself off mute, or I can do that as well. Let's see.
I think I've done that.
Okay, great. I can.
I want to ask about the dippings in.
Can you hear?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. So I want to ask about the actual way it's done. I mean, we always have a discussion at the Seder because we follow the custom of my father. And when it comes, and it's been argued against this, but when you're saying that, especially with the charoset and the moror, he always took like a little, and this is not for the sandwich part, but he took a little piece of matzah and put the charoset and the moror, dipping it that way. Now, is that taking away from it, or can you do it that way? How else do you do it?
So you took the maror into charoset with the matzah?
Not as a sandwich, but just as, and he would pass it around from the main Seder plate. And the way to pass it around is you put little pieces of matzah on the plate and then put the charoset and then dip the moror into it. And
that's
then
exactly
that way.
That's exactly the way to do it. That's right. You dip the maror into the charoset. It could be on a plate or it could be on a matzah. You could do it in different kinds of ways. So that's right. You take the maror, which is the lettuce. Very often we do lettuce together with some horseradish, and we dip it into the charoset. And so that's right. If they pass that around and it's on the matzah, that's a traditional way to eat them. And then you eat the maror, right? You have the maror. It's been dipped in the charoset. Doesn't really have much charoset on it. You dip it into it, and then you eat the maror.
Oh, we eat it together. I mean, you have the charoset and then you put the maror. You just.
Well, you're supposed to dip the maror into the charoset. You're not supposed to really eat the charoset. You dip the maror into the charoset, and there might be little pieces of the charoset on the maror, and then, and you eat the maror.
Okay, and just one short question. You mentioned parsley and potato as being, that's not the bitter because you're dipping it into the salt, right? That's supposed to be the sweet. So why do people use romaine that might be bitter?
It's an aftertaste, I think.
For the karpas?
Yes.
Karpas, you should not use romaine for the karpas. There's no prohibition, but karpas is supposed to be like a potato or parsley or something like that. That's usually what we take. We take a potato, parsley, and we dip it into salt water. Some people use a radish, but I haven't heard of using romaine.
Well, then they use romaine because it didn't taste bitter, but it had bitter aftertaste. Somebody told me once.
I mean, we don't use romaine, but
no romaine lettuce is maror. Romaine lettuce is one of the main foods of maror.
Yes.
All right. So and it starts out bitter, and now romaine ends up has some sweetness to it. Does it have a bitter aftertaste? I'm not sure. Let's talk for a few minutes. So now we've discussed the overall framework of the Haggadah. We understand a few of the different themes, and that there's a journey. What I'm trying to show is also that there's a journey and transition that's taking place over the course of the Seder. It's a journey and transition for physical freedom, as we said, represented by the Manishtana questions, and then it's a journey in a spiritual and intellectual and religious sense, represented by the 4 questions of the Chacham Rasha, etc. And now what I just showed is through the 2 dippings, which is a fascinating journey that we have from division, from fragmentation to unity, because that's also a key component of what we're trying to do. The Seder evening is a transformation from slavery to freedom, and it has a few of these different elements that we're trying to, it's multi-layered. It's also a multi-sensory experience, and there's different people around the Seder table. And this year it's a little bit different, and we have fewer people than perhaps ever we've had around the Seder table, but the Seder still is the same in terms of transmitting the values to the next generation. And it's not just the freedoms in the past that we've achieved, but also how we're going to achieve freedoms in the present and in the future. And it's at least 3 different dimensions: the physical, the spiritual, but also how we relate to one another. And it's moving from that place of division, represented by the karpas, going to the place of achdut, represented by the maror, into the charoset. One last thing that I wanted to highlight for you, because how can you have a Pesach shiur about the Seder without the 4 cups of wine and grape juice? We all know that there's a mitzvah at the Seder to have 4 cups of wine or grape juice. One reason for the 4 cups is because it's parallel to the 4 expressions of redemption, right? V'hotzeti, v'hitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti, that are mentioned at the beginning of the portion of Eira. A second idea that provides a reason for the 4 cups is that when Yosef is in prison, so the butler and baker have these dreams that Yosef interprets, and when the butler shares his dream about, right, with the cup of Paro, he mentions the word kos 4 times. And so that's perhaps another reason, an allusion to the concept of 4 cups at the Pesach Seder. Now, the Gemara has an interesting question, which is, which of these cups do you lean for? Right? We know that one idea that we do at the Seder is we recline. Rav Soloveitchik said that reclining is an act of defiance, right? That the Jewish people had to defy the orders of Paro, and they had to defy the Egyptian society and break free from that. And so when you recline, it's kind of like it's a posture of confidence and defiance when you lean on your side. Of course, this was something they used to do in the days of the Mishnah and Gemara. That's the way they would have their meals. And when they would have a meal of significance and permanence, they would recline. And that's another reason why we recline nowadays, which is to remind ourselves of the way they reclined in the old days. And it's to make that gesture to show that this is a meal of tremendous significance and meaning. fleeting, it's not casual, but it's something that this is a real meal that I want to grow from. But the Gemara asks, do we do Heseba, do we recline for the first 2 cups of wine? Or do we recline for the last 2 cups of wine, or not at all? Do we recline for the cups of wine? So the Gemara says in Psachim that there were 2 contradictory statements of Rav Nachman. One said that you recline for the cups, and one said you don't recline for the cups. So the Gemara resolves the contradiction by saying that one statement was for the first 2 cups, and one statement was for the last 2 cups. And but then the Gemara's question is, so which is which? Do you recline for the first 2, or do you recline for the last 2? Now the conclusion of the Gemara is that you recline for all 4, which we'll come back to in a second. And that is our custom. We recline for the eating of the matzah, and you recline for all 4 cups of wine at the Seder. But the Gemara gives an argument of why you would just do the first 2 and not the last 2. The Gemara first says like this. The Gemara says that it probably makes sense that you should have to recline for the first 2 cups of wine, because that's when you're going into freedom. However, for the second 2 cups of wine, you're already free. It's old news, the fact that the Jewish people have been freed. And my dahava hava, the Gemara says, what happened already. So perhaps you should just recline for the first 2 cups of wine, because that's when we're being liberated from Egypt, and we recline to demonstrate freedom. But for the last 2 cups, it's already an old story that we've been freed from Egypt. And the second analysis of the Gemara, then the Gemara says that maybe it makes sense to say no. Maybe it makes sense to say just for the last 2 cups of wine you should recline. Why? Because for the first 2 cups we're still in servitude, and it's only in the last 2 cups now we're totally free, and that's the time that we should recline. But for the first 2 cups, maybe you don't have to recline because the process of redemption is not yet complete. So those are the 2 arguments of the Gemara to show that you could make an argument that the first 2 require it, only the first 2. You could make an argument that the last 2 require it. And the Gemara's conclusion is that all 4 cups require the Heseba. Number one, because we don't really know who's right, so we say, you know what, just recline for all 4 cups. But the Gemara's conclusion is that all 4 cups require reclining. And perhaps what is that teaching us? And by the way, this is all teaching us that when we have the Seder night, it's not just that we're remembering the story, we're trying to reenact the experience. And that's a key element of what we're trying to achieve. We're reenacting the experience of the Exodus, and we're also trying to bring the lessons into our lives to try to free ourselves from the shackles, free ourselves from things that limit us in our time. But what you see from the conclusion of the Gemara is something very interesting, that basically we're rejecting both arguments, right? What was the first argument? The first argument was that only the first 2 require leaning. Why? Because that's when we're being free. The last 2, so then you don't have to recline anymore because it's an old story that we left Mitzrayim. My dahava hava, what happened, and it's not important to us. So the Gemara, by saying that no, we recline by all 4 cups, is rejecting that argument. A Jew never says, my dahava hava, what was, and it doesn't relate to me. A Jew never says that. Of course, we relate to the past in different ways, depending on what it is. If it's a failure, we try to grow from that experience. If it's a great moment and a triumph, so then we always express gratitude for it. But it's not that what was, right? What was continues to impact me in our time, right? That's the Jew relationship. That's the Jewish relationship with history. That it's not just his story. It's not just history, his story, and it doesn't relate to me. No, that world history, but certainly Jewish history, is something that continues to relate to me until this very day. So we never say my dahava hava. All right, so we reject the first argument of the Gemara. And what was the second argument of the Gemara? The second argument of the Gemara was that maybe it just makes sense to just recline for the second 2 cups. Why? Because the first 2 cups, the redemption wasn't yet complete, right? We were in the process of the redemption, but it wasn't yet complete. And so maybe we shouldn't recline at that point in time, right? Maybe it only makes sense to recline for the last 2 cups. And we reject that as well. We reject that mindset as well, because a Jew has to understand that we don't only express gratitude for a complete redemption. We understand that we have the ability to celebrate and express gratitude even for something that is incomplete. And so we recline not just for the last 2 cups when the redemption was complete. We recline even for the first 2 when it's a process that's developing and undergoing. We also are able to express gratitude for those stages where it's incomplete. And this is certainly relevant for us in our times in many different respects on a national level for the state of Israel. What do we say? Bless the state of Israel. Right? We ask Hashem to bless, and we express gratitude for the state of Israel. Right? We express tremendous gratitude and appreciation for the establishment of Israel in our generation. It's the miracle of our generation. We're so appreciative of it, and we celebrate it, but we recognize that it's incomplete. We say this is not the end of the story. We're not yet there yet. We say, bless Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Tzmichat Gulatenu. This is the beginning of the blossoming of redemption. It's the beginning of the blossoming. We're hoping and praying for the further development. We recognize that Israel is the conduit through which the redemption of the Jewish people will occur. And we're hoping for more, but we can express appreciation for now, even when it's incomplete. And in our lives as well. Right? In our lives as well, we're always trying to find that balance between being thankful for what we have and feeling good about ourselves and feeling good about where we are, but hopeful and praying for more. And so that's in terms of our abilities and where we are in our lives, right? We're thankful for the blessings that we have, even during these times of crisis and difficulty, things that we're experiencing that we've never experienced before, but we're thankful for the gifts that we have, and we're able to express appreciation for even things where things are incomplete. We're not with everyone at the Seder this year. We don't have the freedoms that we're used to having at this period of time. But we can still express appreciation for the blessings and gifts that we do have. And of course, we're hopeful and praying to Hashem that the incomplete name of Hashem, the incomplete redemption that we are thankful for, that should become, Hashem's name should become complete. And our blessings should increase, and for the nation of Israel and for us as individuals, that there should only be better times and complete blessings and freedoms for all of us. Yes, Sam.
Shiur, Rabbi, really beautiful shiur. You mentioned the importance of the achdut and the symbolism of the dippings, and I think this really goes very well with the idea of the spiritual and the physical, because the spiritual is really on a way between man and God, man and Hashem, but we also have the component of Ben Adam Lechavero. So I think we want to accomplish both, not only on a spiritual level to become close to Hashem, Ben Adam Lamakom, but also Lechavero.
Okay, very, very nice. In terms of spiritual, physical, seeing that in terms of our relation with Hashem and relationship with other people. That's a nice way to put it. Thank you, Sam. Then I think Sam Smith had a suggestion.
Yes. It's actually a little joke. In spite of the bad times, don't worry. These 2 will pass over.
Very good. Passover, these two will pass over. That's absolutely right. That's Passover. And that's the expression of Gamze Yavor. This too shall pass, correct?
Right, correct.
Beautiful.
Okay, what else? Any other questions? Any other thoughts? All right, so that's great learning with you. Thank you all so much for joining us, and continue to stay well. It's great to see all of you. And Judy, thanks for your, okay, great, applause. Very, very good, wonderful.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Applause to all of you. Thank you all so much.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
So nice to see you and to learn together with you. Okay, take care and be well, stay healthy, and continue to stay in touch.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Take care, everyone.
Show me how you got there.
I'm not sure. I went through this whole thing
You
this
didn't
morning.
leave it yet.